right, welcome to WSQ number 32. Today we're talking about the characteristics of seed plants. We talked about in our last WSQ about the characteristics of non-vascular plants and seedless vascular plants. Today we're going to talk about those groups that would fit under the seed-bearing plants. And so we're going to learn about the characteristics that all seed plants share, and we're going to learn just a kind of a rough overview of how seeds ultimately become plants. So first of all, let's just start out by asking the big question: what is a seed plant? To be a seed plant, there's basically two different classifications that have to be met. One, seed plants have vascular tissue, so they have to be vascular plants. And seed plants use pollen and seeds to reproduce. Okay. Now, if we go back and think about non-vascular plants, well, non-vascular plants don't have vascular tissue, and they don't reproduce with seeds or pollen. And even in seedless vascular plants like ferns, they use spores to reproduce as opposed to seeds. So that's why they're seedless vascular plants. So what do those words mean? What's pollen? Pollen, by definition, are just tiny little structures that contain the cells that ultimately will become the sperm cells, and will give, as haploid cells, will give a portion of the genetic information on to the next generation. If you have allergies, you know what pollen is. Pollen is the little flaky things, if you've ever seen in flowers, that rubs on your shirt, or if you've ever stuck your nose into a lily or something like that and you have pollen all over you. That's the pollen that we're talking about. The seed is the structure that contains the young plant and a protective covering, and we're going to talk about what seeds are as we progress forward and what are the different parts to them. So that's what a seed plant is. It has to have vascular tissue and has to use pollen and seeds to reproduce. And the groups that fit into that we're going to talk about are going to be angiosperms and gymnosperms. So that's what a seed plant is. Now, continuing on, we have to understand that, as we saw in the first one, they have vascular tissue. Now, what's the vascular tissue look like? The stems of vascular plants, okay, when we say they have vascular tissue, we're talking about two structures, two types of tissue, xylem and phloem. Okay, they also have thicker cell walls that are used to, with the vascular tissue, the cell walls of plants are also used to support the plant. We talked about that as being one of the original importances of what plants need to live on land. Now, xylem cells are dead and hollow cells at maturity. They have really strong walls. They form these specialized tubes that are long. Their whole purpose is to carry water up the plant. So water comes in the roots and then gets driven up the plant through several processes we're going to talk about, one of which just surface area, and draws the water up into the leaves, okay, and the rest of the body. So that's the xylem tissue. Phloem tissue are living cells. Phloem tissue are the specialized cells that are used to transport food that's been made in the plant's leaves to other parts of the plants. And you'll notice in this example, and we'll see this often, is that the plant, the xylem and the phloem tissue, is usually stacked. And typically the phloem tissue is going to be on the outside, and the xylem tissue is going to be on the inside. If you've ever seen a tree that's been cut down, you'll see the center of the tree, we call that heartwood. Okay, this inside portion, and that heartwood is in a tree is the xylem tissues that have literally stopped functioning. That's also why if you cut into a tree, if you cut below the bark and into the actual tree, you can actually damage these phloem tissues and really harm the tree. If you see sap coming out, it could cause problems and actually damage the tree. So xylem and phloem are the vascular structures, the vascular tissues that are useful. And an easy way to think about this, xylem, I had a teacher in junior high, my junior high teacher, so I say xylem up and phloem down. And what he meant by that was xylem up. In xylem up, that meant that this xylem was going to take water and transport it up from the roots to the rest of the plant. And then phloem down, right? Let's do down. Phloem down means that it was going to take sugar nutrients, right? And take sugar down to the plant. Okay, so xylem up, phloem down is a nice, easy way for you guys to remember these two structures and which direction each of them act or work. So that's what makes a seed bearing vascular plant. Now, let's talk for a minute about how seeds actually become new plants. You can break seeds down into three main parts, and I don't care if it's a corn seed or a bean seed or a pine seed. Now, in each of these examples, we need to understand something. The pine seed here would be an example of a gymnosperm. The corn and the bean seeds are both examples of angiosperms. But as far as the seed goes, there are just three main parts: the embryo, the stored food, and the seed coat. And let's look at each of them. The embryo is actually just the young plant. This is what develops at the beginning from a zygote stage. So you have pollination, which we'll talk about, where the pollen is actually transferred from the male portion of the plant to the female portion of the plant, depending upon an angiosperm or a gymnosperm. That happens in different ways. But when the sperm reaches the egg inside of the ovule, what you end up getting is fertilization. That's when the sperm and the egg unite, and you get a new organism, a zygote. Okay, the zygote is what develops into this young plant in the seed. Okay, what's made in the seed. Now, as we look at each of these examples, we can see. So here is in the corn example, we can see here is the young embryo. Okay, it has the stem and the root right here, and the cotyledon, which would be the leaves. Okay, those first leaves that are going to form. We can see in the bean plant, exact same thing. Okay, the stem and the root, the cotyledon, which is our leaves. And even in the pine seed, we can see the stem and the root and the cotyledon that's going to be forming there. Now, what you need to understand is that embryo is what will ultimately grow into the full plant. That's that beginning or starter. The rest of the stuff that's in this is the purpose is not a part of the plant. It's to help the plant. It's got stored food. We can see all the stored food here. We can see all the stored food here. We can see all the stored food here. Now, the reason why we eat beans and why we eat corn and why we eat pine seeds is there's stored food in those that's energy, that we can actually gain energy from that. The purpose of the food for the seed is just to help the embryo have enough nutrition to be able to get started until it can make its own food through photosynthesis. So there's the embryo, there's the stored food, and the last thing that you'll see is what's called the seed coat. You notice we have a seed coat on each of these. The seed coat is designed to protect the embryo and food from drying out. Basically, when seeds fall, you'll notice a lot of times seeds fall in the winter, okay, or are planted in, later in the fall, and they may actually be dormant for a while. Seeds don't actually get activated until they're moistened. Once they're moistened, it's like it wakes up the seed. It actually starts to soften the seed coat, and the plant literally comes alive, and the embryo begins growing. And so the embryo, the stored food, the seed coat, the three parts that make up the seed. Now, how do seeds get around? A seed can be dispersed in a lot of different ways, but we're just going to talk about a few. Okay, there's three major divisions or ways that I would say seeds can be dispersed, and there's a fourth we'll talk about. But first of all, they can be dispersed by animals. Okay, now if we notice, we have different examples. There's types of seeds known as hitchhikers. These are seeds that, like certain thorn bushes and things like that, that have hitchhikers, things that will actually catch in the fur of an animal. If you've ever had, those barb-like things that can get caught in your dog's skin. I think of, can't think of the name of them, but like thistles and things that will get caught in the fur. That's an example. There's takeaway type seeds. These are seeds like acorns and things that get eaten by animals, that the animals go and store, they'll move somewhere else. And then there's juicy fruits. There's things like blackberries where the animal will actually eat. Okay, so each of these are ways that the animals can disperse the seeds. They'll get dispersed through the animal's waste, or they'll be moved and buried in the ground somewhere else, or they'll, get carried in their fur and dropped at another place. Fruits and seeds can also be dispersed by the wind, and I'm going to add to this, or the water. Okay, wind or water. There's seeds like the maple seed, which if you've ever seen maple seeds, they look like little wings, and they actually, this is a sycamore seed, but maples are similar, and they can fly on the wind. They actually flutter like little helicopters. Parachute type seeds like dandelions. You've ever blown on a dandelion, those seeds can travel quite a distance. And they float on the wind. Water, an example of water would be, I'm going to add this one, would be like if you've ever seen coconuts, okay? Coconut palms. Coconut palms actually float. They're hollow inside. They have liquid coconut milk, but they can float for long distances and actually plant themselves on other islands, which is pretty amazing. The third type is just self-dispersal. There are certain seeds that can actually disperse themselves. And examples of these would be like pepper pots. Okay, it's a type of poppies can have these where they actually will shake and vibrate and the seeds will be moved around. There's the Himalayan balsam plant actually has an exploder. The seed pods actually blow up. And there's other varieties like this where you have self-dispersal. So each of these, whether it's by animals or by wind and water or by self-dispersal, there's ways that the seeds can move. Last thing we're going to talk about today is just how do seeds germinate. You probably, if you go and buy a seed packet, on the back of the packet it'll have a germination time. It'll say 70 days or 10 days or 5 days. A lot of times they'll say 10 days till germination and 70 days until harvest. What germination is, this occurs when the embryo begins to grow again and pushes out of the seed. When it says 7 days till germination, that means from the time you plant that seed in the ground and water it, it should take 7 days before that seed breaks through the soil. Okay, this starts when the seed begins absorbing water. That's always the beginning of germination, so the absorption of water. And the seed will use the stored food inside of the seed to grow for a time. The roots, you'll notice, will grow downward and the leaves will grow upward. And you produce, as we see in this example, this stage of growth from beginning to the end. Notice what's happening. The roots are developing more and more as we go. Let me see that. And the leaves are starting to come out. Now these first leaves, these are the cotyledons. These are not true leaves. These are just seed leaves. They're going to help the leaf get started, and then pretty soon you'll notice a new structure will grow out from this, and you'll get true leaves that'll grow from that. So whenever you hear germination, that's what it's talking about. It's a chance of the seed to become a seedling, to establish itself and grow into a plant. So that is the structure of seed plants. So you've watched WSQ 32 now. Please summarize, answer your questions, and I will see you guys in class. Bye.